Last week, I published a video titled 5 Misunderstood Things About Free Speech. One of the things I said in that video is that I think the concept of free speech is a lot more complicated than how it is usually described by many self-styled defenders of free speech on the internet, most of whom believe that free speech means that they should get to say whatever they want, about whoever they want, however they want, whenever they want, from whatever platform they want, and anything that stands in their way of doing any of those things is an unacceptable infringement on their freedom of speech. Now, I consider this to be a very self-centered, very narcissistic view of freedom of speech. And that is not the view of freedom of speech that I have. And I think that is the source of the disagreement between people like me who take a more broad view of freedom of speech and people who view it in a very narrow first-person sense as I as an individual should be able to say whatever I want, and anything less than that is not free speech. And that's a disagreement that I wanted to sort of explore in this video because it was something that came up over and over again in responses to that video in the comment section on Twitter and Facebook, etc. Many of the folks who disagreed with me or objected to things I said in that video were objecting to that suggestion that freedom of speech does not mean I get to say whatever I want. So I wanted to explain why I think that, why I think that freedom of speech doesn't mean you as an individual always get to say whatever you want. The main reason why I have the view of freedom of speech that I do, as opposed to that other view, is that I see freedom of speech as something that needs to function in society in order for it to be any good. In principle, the notion that free speech means that everybody gets to say whatever they want sounds great. Sounds like, oh, that's total freedom, right? That's perfect total freedom. But when you translate that principle into practical terms and you start to look at a society where everyone is free to say whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, to whoever they want, what does that society look like? And is that a society, A, that anyone would really want to be a part of? And B, is that a society where free expression, free speech is something that would even be able to happen for most people? Would the option of free expression be available to most people in that society? And I think the answer is no. I think in a society where free speech is defined as each individual should be allowed to say whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, to whoever they want, from whatever platform they want, such a society would be a society where eventually, for all practical purposes, free speech would no longer exist. And this is what is called the paradox of tolerance. This is something that has existed in philosophy for a very long time, but it was described and named the paradox of tolerance by Karl Popper in 1945, I think. Popper describes the paradox of tolerance as unlimited tolerance leading inevitably to intolerance. In other words, if you have a society where you say we tolerate everything, including intolerance, inevitably you will wind up with an intolerant society because there will be nothing to prevent the intolerant from taking over, from taking power in that society. And you will wind up with a society that in principle values tolerance very much, but is in practice a very intolerant society. And this can also be phrased in terms of freedom. You could say if we want to have a free society, we cannot have a society where individuals are free to do whatever they want, because inevitably you will end up with a society that is not free, but a society where in fact there is very little freedom. I realize these are very lofty concepts to be discussing in a YouTube video, but actually YouTube provides us with a very instructive microcosm of the paradox of intolerance at work, a great example of what happens when you say, I'm going to tolerate everything, including intolerance, are comment sections of videos that are unmoderated. If you have ever looked at the unmoderated comment section of a YouTube video that has a subject that is even remotely controversial for people watching the video, once that element enters the comment section, unless action is taken to control it or remove it, it will inevitably take over. The comment section, within a matter of hours, sometimes minutes, depending on how quick the deluge comes in, will become just a complete mess, will become completely useless to anyone who watches the video and wants to have anything constructive or relevant to say. It will become just a toxic mess because the intolerance of the people coming to leave those shitty, abusive, aggressive, harassing, trolling comments is allowed to take root and to grow. Unless there is some rule in place that is enforced by, in this case, the person who owns the YouTube channel or the person who is empowered by whatever means for moderating that comment section, unless that level of control is exerted on the comment section and those sorts of comments are removed from that environment, eventually they will come to set the tone for that environment. And that's not what I want for my comment sections. That's why I moderate them. That's why I remove those elements. I don't want my comment sections to be a venue for people to start to pick fights either with me or with other commenters, to talk about how much people suck, whether they're talking about me or someone else in the comments or someone else who's not even involved in the conversation. I don't want them to be a venue for people to be insulting or abusive. I want them to be civil. I want them to be decent. And I want them to be relevant to the subject of the video. And anything that crosses those boundaries, in my opinion, because it's my comment section on my channel, is taken away. And I think that the comment sections on my videos since I've started doing that have been vastly improved and are much more hospitable, so that if someone just happens to stumble upon my video and has something to say about it and looks in the comments, hopefully they will not be frightened away from leaving a comment because they think that they're wading into a toxic pool of sludge by leaving a comment. So does that mean that in comment sections like mine that are very closely, heavily moderated, that anyone has the right to come in and say anything they want to anybody about anything, anywhere, anytime they want? No, that right does not exist in a moderated comment section or a moderated forum or any sort of moderated platform or venue or environment at all. You do not have that right as an individual to say anything you want at any time about anyone in any way. But because there is some level of control imposed, because intolerance is not tolerated, that space is much freer and much more open to free expression, to free speech than it would be otherwise. This sort of moderated space is easy to achieve in a YouTube comment section or an online forum where posts can be removed and troublesome users can be banned from participating. But how do we achieve such a moderated space in general society? Particularly a society like the United States, where citizens have fairly broad constitutional protections against the prohibition of speech. Well, in many ways, American culture already is such a moderated space because there are ways of minimizing the influence of undesirable voices without making them illegal. For example, if an extremist hate group like the Ku Klux Klan wants to hold a public rally, it's legally entitled to do so. The government can't stop the KKK from holding a public rally so long as it doesn't incite violence or commit slander or break the law in some other way. But KKK rallies are typically not televised or promoted in the media. KKK leaders are not invited on radio and television to share their views. Positive portrayals of the KKK in pop culture are virtually non-existent. In other words, while the KKK is legally entitled to speak out and make its presence known, it's given almost no help in doing so. Its voice is marginalized. Its intolerance is not permitted to influence and dominate our cultural discourse. And that's what I care about, and that's what I want. Not just for my comment sections on my YouTube videos, because who gives a shit other than people who watch my YouTube videos? I care about that in terms of my community, in terms of my society, in terms of my country, in terms of human civilization in general. I would love to have a circumstance, an environment where self-expression, free speech of a diversity of viewpoints are allowed and are accessible and are a real possibility for as many people as possible. And in order to open that up to as many people as possible, in order to have a society that is not just free in principle, but is practically free in reality, the sort of place where people are empowered and enabled to speak their mind and to argue and to agree and disagree and whatever, in order to have that, you cannot found it on the principle of completely unfettered free speech, where everybody is allowed to say whatever they want, whenever they want, where the intolerant, the bullies, the obnoxious, the haters, the insulters, the people who do not care about the opinions of others, who don't care about other people being allowed to exercise their free speech as long as they are allowed to exercise theirs and damn the consequences, those voices will be allowed to take over and dominate. And as long as you have a situation where voices like that are allowed to take over and dominate, you do not have an environment that values and enables free speech in a practical sense. That's what I care about. That's why I say it's a much more complex issue than individuals just being allowed to say whatever they want, because the inevitable consequence of that is a society where everyone has a guarantee of free expression in principle, but in reality, many people are unable to exercise, to take advantage of that freedom. And such a society is not a society, in my opinion, that truly values freedom of expression. If you truly care about freedom of speech, if you truly think that it is an essential principle for democracy and freedom and liberty, then you should want to create a society that has the maximum opportunity for its citizens to exercise their freedom of speech, their freedom of expression. And a society where the rule is everybody can say whatever they want, whenever they want, is not such a society. In such a society, the intolerant will eventually overpower the tolerant, and you will be left with a society where, even though the principle of freedom of speech will be maintained and cherished for all practical purposes, freedom of speech will no longer exist. That is not the society that I want to live in. That is not the society that I am advocating for, and that is not the kind of freedom of speech that I want or that I have any real respect for. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.